The receipt is still folded in your pocket, creased from you checking it twice in the mirror before you walked back to the table. You paid without hesitation, made sure the waiter saw you do it, made sure she noticed the casual confidence in the way you signed. She smiled, leaned across the table, touched your arm, said thank you in that soft voice that feels like approval if you want it to. You told yourself that this is how it's supposed to work, that providing is attractive, that generosity is masculine, that this is what grown men do. You felt tall walking out of the restaurant, even though something in your chest felt strangely hollow, like the moment ended the second the bill was settled, and now you were just moving through the rest of the night on fumes. Later, she's texting her friend. Not about how you made her feel, not about the way you looked at her, not about the energy you brought into the room. She's laughing about how easy you are, how predictable it was, how she knew you'd pay before you even reached for your wallet. She doesn't hate you. She's not evil. She's just not impressed either. You never even crossed her mind as someone to desire, only someone to accept from. And if that sentence makes your jaw tighten a little, if it makes you want to argue, pause the video and leave a comment explaining why you disagree. Because that resistance is exactly where this conversation lives. You've been told your whole life that money equals security and security equals attraction. You absorbed it quietly through movies, through older men giving advice they never examined, through women saying they want stability while responding to something else entirely. You learned to equate effort with value, to believe that the more you give, the more you're worth. So when you lead with your wallet, you think you're showing seriousness, maturity, intent. You think you're separating yourself from the broke guys, the immature guys, the ones who can't afford dates or trips or gifts. You think you're stepping into your role. But what you're actually doing is handing over the frame before you ever step into it. Look at how you behave when money is your opening move. Your shoulders lean forward just a little. Your voice softens when you ask instead of assume. You watch her reactions too closely, waiting to see if the spend landed, if the investment paid off emotionally. You become careful, agreeable, accommodating in ways you wouldn't call weakness, but that feel like it when you replay the night alone. You start negotiating for affection without realizing that's what you're doing. And she feels that shift immediately, not consciously, not maliciously, but instinctively. The same way you feel when someone wants something from you more than you want to give it. You tell yourself that attraction will grow later, that respect comes with consistency, that once she sees how reliable you are, she'll settle into appreciation. But desire doesn't work on delayed payments. It's not a reward for loyalty. It's a reaction to presence, to certainty, to a man who doesn't need to convince her of his value because he's already living inside it. When money leads, it replaces that presence with transaction. She may enjoy the benefits, she may even enjoy your company, but she will never confuse access with admiration. And if you've ever wondered why the more you do, the less she seems to give back, this is where the answer starts forming, whether you like it or not. Think about how you feel around someone who tries too hard to impress you. Someone who keeps offering favors, paying for things, over-explaining their generosity so you don't miss it. You don't feel pulled toward them. You feel pressured, even if you're polite about it. You feel like the interaction has a price tag attached, like gratitude is expected in exchange for effort. You might accept the help, but something in you resists respecting them fully, because respect can't be purchased, only observed. Women experience the same thing, except they're socialized to smile through it and call it kindness. There's a moment that happens quietly when a woman realizes she doesn't have to earn you. When your attention, your resources, your energy are already available without challenge, without tension, without any standard she has to rise to. In that moment, she relaxes, but not in the way you want. She relaxes into comfort, not excitement. She relaxes into entitlement, not admiration. She stops wondering who you are and starts wondering what else you'll give. And if you've felt that shift happen in real time, if you've watched her warmth turn casual, her interest turn lazy, Hit like on this video because you're not imagining it and you're not alone. The hardest part to accept is that she's not disrespecting you on purpose. She's responding honestly to the dynamic you set. You positioned yourself as the provider before you were ever the prize, so she treats you like a resource instead of a man she wants to impress. You think your money is earning you points, but what it's actually doing is removing the mystery, the edge, the question of whether she's chosen or being chosen. Desire thrives in tension, not in certainty. Respect grows when someone feels your boundaries before they feel your generosity. You might be thinking about the exceptions right now, about the couples you know where the man pays for everything and the woman seems happy, about the narratives that tell you men are supposed to provide while women appreciate. But watch closely, not from the outside, not from Instagram smiles or public gestures. Watch how she speaks to him when no one's around. Watch how quickly she dismisses his opinions, how easily she challenges him, how little effort she makes to keep his attention. Then compare that to how she behaves around men she hasn't secured yet, men who don't lead with money but with presence, with self-direction, with a life that doesn't rearrange itself for her approval. The difference isn't subtle once you let yourself see it. This is the part where ego wants to interrupt, where you want to say that women like money, that they're wired for security, that this is just how the world works. There's truth in that, but it's incomplete truth. And incomplete truth is how men stay stuck. Women appreciate resources. They do not respect men who use resources to compensate for absence. They can tell the difference immediately, even if they can't articulate it, even if they benefit from it. Appreciation and attraction are not the same currency, and confusing them is how men end up feeling used while insisting they are being valued. If this is landing a little too close, if you're thinking about the trips you paid for, the dinners you covered, the gifts you gave, hoping it would lock something in, pause for a second and share this video with someone you know is doing the same thing. Not to shame them, but because this realization changes how you move forever once it clicks. You don't unsee it. You don't go back to believing effort equals desire. You start noticing the quiet moments where attraction either grows or dies, long before money ever enters the picture. The real trap isn't that women take advantage of men who lead with money. The trap is that men feel powerful while doing it, just long enough to avoid questioning why they still feel empty afterward. You feel in control when you pay, when you provide, when you handle things. It feels like leadership. But leadership without standards is just service dressed up as dominance, and service doesn't inspire longing, it inspires consumption. She consumes what you offer and moves on emotionally while you're still telling yourself the story that you're building something meaningful. Sit with that image for a moment, not as an accusation, not as an insult, but as a mirror. You standing there, wallet open, thinking you're stepping into manhood, while she's already categorizing you into a role that doesn't include desire. If this video's making you uncomfortable, subscribe right now, because this channel exists to sit in the discomfort most men avoid, the kind that doesn't flatter you but frees you once you stop fighting it. Chapter 2. She tells you she's tired tonight, says she had a long day, maybe throws in a smile emoji so it doesn't feel harsh. You say no problem, tell her to rest, tell her you understand. You even mean it. An hour later, you're scrolling, and you see her tagged in a story at a lounge, glass in hand, laughing with people you've never met. Your stomach drops, but you don't confront her. You don't want to seem insecure. You don't want to lose whatever position you think you're holding. So instead, you rationalize it. You tell yourself she probably needed a break from stress, that she didn't want to drag you out, that next time will be different. And the craziest part is you still don't feel angry. You feel embarrassed, not embarrassed because she went out, but because deep down you already knew. You felt it before she said she was tired. You felt it when you paid for dinner last week and she barely looked up from her phone. You felt it when she accepted the gift with a quick thank you and zero curiosity about you afterward. You felt it in the way she never asks what you're doing unless it affects her plans. But you kept moving forward anyway, because you were taught that persistence is masculine and pulling back is weakness, so you stayed, hoping effort would eventually turn into interest. This is where most men lie to themselves. They call it patience. They call it investment. They call it playing the long game. What it really is avoidance. Avoidance of the fact that attraction is already gone, if it was ever there to begin with. Avoidance of the fact that no amount of money fixes a dynamic that was wrong from the start. You weren't chosen, you were accepted. And there's a massive difference between those two states that only becomes obvious once you've lived through both. When a woman chooses you, you feel it immediately. There's tension, there's curiosity, there's effort coming from her side without you asking for it. She wants to be seen by you, not just supported by you. When she accepts you, there's politeness, comfort, convenience. She fits you into her life instead of leaning into you. And money makes acceptance easier. It smooths the edges. It lowers her resistance. It gives her a reason to stay without ever giving her a reason to desire. You might be thinking right now that this sounds cynical, that it frames women as opportunistic or shallow. That's not what this is. This is about human behavior, not morality. People respond to value they can feel, not value they're told about. If money was enough, every wealthy man would have women deeply in love with him. If provision created attraction, men wouldn't feel this hollow confusion after doing everything right. The problem isn't women. The problem is men mistaking utility for desire and calling it love so they don't have to face the truth. Watch how different you act around her compared to how you act around your friends or in your work. Notice how you soften your opinions. Notice how you hesitate before disagreeing. Notice how you frame your boundaries as suggestions instead of statements. That's not confidence. That's negotiation. And negotiation kills attraction faster than silence ever could. She senses that you're trying to maintain access instead of leading interaction. And once she senses that, she stops seeing you as someone to impress and starts seeing you as someone to manage. This is where the laughing behind your back comes in, and it's uncomfortable to talk about because it feels humiliating. Not because she's cruel, but because she doesn't see the situation the way you do. You think you're building something. She thinks you're doing what men like you do. She talks to her friends about how nice you are, how generous you are, how you always come through. She doesn't talk about how exciting you are or how she feels pulled toward you. And the laughter isn't malicious. It's casual. It's the same tone you use when you talk about something that doesn't carry weight. If you've ever been described as sweet or really nice in this context, you already know what that means even if you don't want to admit it. Sweet is what you call someone you don't desire but don't want to lose benefits from. Nice is what you call someone you don't fear disappointing. Those words aren't compliments, they're classifications. And once you're classified, money doesn't elevate you, it just solidifies the role. There's a moment where she realizes you're not going anywhere, where she realizes she can cancel plans last minute and you'll understand, where she realizes she can take days to respond and you'll still be there, where she realizes your generosity isn't conditional on her effort. In that moment, the power dynamic locks in. You think you're proving reliability. She feels safety without attraction, and safety without attraction doesn't turn into love. It turns into entitlement. You might notice yourself getting resentful at this stage, not outwardly, but internally. You start keeping score. You start noticing how much you've spent, how much you've done, how little you're getting back emotionally. You don't express it because you don't want to be that guy, but it leaks out in subtle ways. Passive comments, forced jokes, slight changes in tone. She feels that too. And instead of responding with care, she pulls away more because now the interaction feels heavy. This is usually when men double down. They plan a bigger date. They buy a better gift. They offer more support. They think effort will reverse distance, but distance isn't caused by lack of effort. It's caused by lack of polarity. You're too available, too agreeable, too invested without requiring anything in return. Money becomes the tool you use to justify staying in a dynamic that no longer respects you. And she lets you because there's no incentive not to. The illusion that hurts the most is the belief that she owes you something. That because you paid, because you showed up, because you were consistent, she should respond with affection. But attraction isn't transactional. It doesn't reward effort the way work does. It responds to who you are being, not what you're giving. And when you give without being anchored in yourself, you're not generous, you're compensating. This is where men get angry at women instead of honest with themselves. They say women are users, gold diggers, manipulators. But that anger is misdirected. Women didn't ask you to lead with money. You chose that because it felt safer than leading with yourself. It felt measurable. It felt controllable. You knew how much you were giving and hoped that number would translate into certainty. But certainty kills desire. Mystery fuels it. And money removes mystery instantly. Think about the men she talks about with energy. The ones she complains about, the ones she can't quite figure out, the ones who don't always respond immediately, the ones who live full lives that don't orbit her validation. Notice how those men aren't buying her interest. They're occupying space in her mind. And occupying space is far more powerful than occupying a role. You don't get that by paying. You get that by being grounded enough to walk away when the dynamic isn't right. Chapter 3. You're sitting across from her, and you can feel it before you can explain it. The way she leans back instead of in. The way her eyes wander just a little too often, not because she's distracted, but because she's not anchored. You're talking, filling the space, trying to keep the energy alive, and every sentence feels like it lands and then evaporates. So you do what you've learned to do. You suggest another drink. You suggest dessert. You suggest the weekend trip you mentioned last time. You keep offering more because silence feels dangerous and pulling back feels like failure. And she accepts because why wouldn't she? What you don't notice in that moment is how the dynamic has already shifted beneath your feet. You think you're leading. She feels like she's being entertained. You think you're investing. She feels like she's being accommodated. The difference between those two perceptions is everything. And it's the reason men who lead with money always feel like they're chasing something that never quite arrives. You're running toward an outcome she never promised, hoping consistency will turn into chemistry. There's a specific kind of confidence that can't be purchased, and women recognize its absence immediately. It's the confidence of a man who would still be fine if she stood up and walked away mid-conversation. Not because he's cold or detached, but because his sense of self isn't being negotiated in the interaction. When you lead with money, you remove that tension. You signal, without saying it, that losing her would hurt more than losing your resources. And once that signal is sent, it's almost impossible to take back. You might think you're hiding it well. You might think you're being subtle, classy, controlled, but attraction doesn't respond to what you say. It responds to what you tolerate. Every time you overlook a flake, every time you excuse disinterest, every time you keep showing up at the same emotional altitude while she stays comfortably low effort, you teach her how to treat you. And money accelerates that lesson because it rewards behavior without requiring presence. This is why women don't love tricks. Not magic tricks, not clever tricks, not financial tricks. Not the guy who thinks he's cracked some code by paying for everything and calling it masculinity. Tricks are attempts to bypass truth. And women are allergic to bypasses when it comes to attraction. You can't outsmart instinct. You can't substitute resources for resonance. You can't purchase polarity. When a man tries, it reads as desperation dressed up in confidence. Think about the moments where you felt most powerful in your life. Not richest, not most successful, but most solid. It wasn't when you were impressing someone. It was when you were fully in yourself. When you said no without guilt. When you walked away without explaining. When you didn't need agreement to feel certain. That energy is unmistakable. And it's the energy money-driven men lose access to because they outsource their sense of worth to what they can provide instead of who they are. There's a quiet resentment that builds when you play this role for too long. You feel it when you see her give effortless attention to men who haven't done half of what you've done. You feel it when she lights up for someone who didn't buy her anything. You feel it when she cancels on you but rearranges her schedule for someone else. And instead of recognizing that the dynamic was wrong, you tell yourself she's ungrateful. You tell yourself women don't appreciate good men anymore. You turn your disappointment outward instead of inward, because inward would require admitting that your strategy was flawed. Money didn't fail you. The idea that money creates attraction failed you. The belief that provision equals leadership failed you. And it failed generations of men who were taught to replace presence with performance. Women don't want to be managed. They want to be met. And when you meet someone as a walking utility, you invite them to treat you like one. There's something deeply uncomfortable about realizing that she never saw you the way you saw her. That while you were imagining potential, she was assessing convenience. That while you were thinking long-term, she was thinking situational. That gap is where the laughter lives, not cruel laughter, not mockery. Just the casual, unweighted amusement of someone who knows the dynamic isn't serious. And once you understand that, you realize the humiliation isn't in her behavior. It's in your self-betrayal. You betrayed yourself the moment you ignored the first feeling of misalignment. The first moment you felt you were giving more than you were receiving emotionally. The first time you adjusted yourself to keep her comfortable. The first time you paid, hoping it would shift the energy. Those moments were quiet, almost invisible, but they were decisive. Because attraction is built on congruence, not compensation. And compensation always leaks. If you're watching this and you feel a knot forming in your chest, that's not guilt. That's recognition. That's the part of you that knew better but didn't act, because walking away felt too risky. Because letting go felt like losing. But staying in a dynamic where you're not respected is the real loss, even if it's disguised as effort and generosity. Men who rely on money to lead are terrified of silence. Silence exposes whether your presence is enough. Silence reveals whether she leans in or checks out. Silence removes the distractions you use to maintain control. And when silence feels threatening, you fill it with spending. You fill it with planning. You fill it with proving. But proving never creates attraction. It only postpones rejection. Notice how the men who don't need to impress are comfortable letting moments breathe. They don't rush to entertain. They don't chase reactions. They don't panic when energy dips. They let the interaction either rise or die naturally. That willingness to let things fall apart is what creates gravity. And gravity is what money can never buy. You might be asking yourself now what you're supposed to do instead. That question itself is revealing, because it shows how deeply conditioned you've been to perform. There is no trick to replace the old one. There is no strategy to plug in. There's only the uncomfortable process of becoming someone who doesn't need to purchase interest, because his life already has direction, standards, and self-respect built into it. And that process can't be rushed or outsourced. This chapter isn't about turning you into someone cold or withholding. It's about removing the illusion that generosity creates desire. True generosity flows from abundance, not from hunger. When you're abundant in self, money becomes an extension of who you are, not a substitute for it. And women feel that difference instantly, the same way they feel the difference between a man offering because he wants to and a man offering because he needs something back. Chapter 4. You stop reaching for your wallet before you even realize you've done it, not as a tactic, not as some calculated move. It happens because something inside you finally gets tired of the exchange rate, the constant conversion of effort into silence, the endless hope that the next gesture will finally tip the scale. You sit there, hands still, and the space between you stretches in a way that feels unfamiliar. She looks at you, waits, and for the first time, you don't rush to fill the gap. That pause tells you more than 1,000 dates ever did. You see the flicker in her face, confusion first, then expectation, then a subtle recalibration. She's trying to figure out what changed, not because she misses your money, but because she misses the certainty that came with it. The certainty that you would always step in, always smooth things over, always take responsibility for the momentum. When that disappears, the dynamic is exposed, and exposure is terrifying when the attraction was never mutual to begin with. This is the moment most men undo their own growth. The moment discomfort creeps in and they panic. They feel the distance and interpret it as failure instead of information. They mistake her confusion for disinterest and rush to repair it. They crack a joke. They suggest something. They reach for the credit card again, telling themselves they're just being polite, just being themselves. But what they're really doing is retreating back into the role that kept them invisible but tolerated. If you've ever felt the urge to fix the mood, to restore the energy, to win her back the second you stop performing, that urge is the conditioning talking. That's the part of you that learned early on that approval comes from usefulness, that being liked requires output, that silence means danger. And women don't create that conditioning. Life does. Family does. Culture does. Women simply reveal it when they stop responding to it the way you hoped they would. Here's the part no one tells you. When you stop leading with money, you don't suddenly become more attractive to the same woman. That's the fantasy men cling to so they don't have to grieve. Most of the time, she fades, not dramatically, not angrily. She just becomes less available, less responsive, less warm. And that's not a failure. That's clarity. That's the relationship ending exactly when the illusion ended. And if you've never let yourself experience that clean break, you've been stuck in emotional debt longer than you realize. Men who finally stop paying their way into relevance often feel a wave of relief mixed with fear. Relief because the pressure is gone. Fear because now they have to sit with the truth. If she doesn't lean in without the incentives, there was nothing to save. And that truth hurts, but it also frees you. Because now you're no longer confusing persistence with connection or generosity with intimacy. There's a strange confidence that comes from letting a dynamic collapse, not because you enjoy loss, but because you stop contorting yourself to prevent it. You start to trust that whatever remains after you stop performing is what was actually real. And real, even when it's quiet or lonely, feels better than constant effort met with indifference. Women don't suddenly turn cruel when the money stops. They turn honest. The politeness fades. The excuses thin out. The investment mirrors yours instead of exceeding it. And if that mirroring reveals emptiness, it wasn't created in that moment. It was always there, hidden behind dinners and trips and favors. Money didn't build the relationship. It concealed its absence. This is where men who actually learn from this experience diverge from men who repeat it forever. One group hardens. They decide never to give again. They become suspicious, guarded, transactional in the opposite direction. They keep score aggressively, turning every interaction into a test. The other group softens in a different way. They stop chasing outcomes and start standing in themselves. They give when it's clean. They invest when it's mutual. They walk away when it's not, without resentment or explanation. Standing in yourself feels boring at first if you're used to earning attention. There's no rush, no dopamine hit from approval, no spike when she responds positively to a gesture. It's quieter, slower. And that slowness scares men who built their identity on reaction. But that quiet is where your presence actually starts to carry weight. Because you're no longer trying to extract a response. You're simply showing up as you are and letting that be enough or not. Think about how different your body feels when you're not trying to win someone. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing deepens. Your words come out slower, more deliberate. You're not scanning for approval. You're not adjusting mid-sentence. That state is magnetic not because it's perfect, but because it's grounded. And grounded men don't need to announce their value. They let it be discovered or not at all. The illusion that money creates respect keeps men stuck in performance mode long after the audience has stopped applauding. Respect grows from consistency between what you say, what you tolerate, and what you walk away from. When those three align, you don't have to convince anyone of anything. Your presence does the talking. And presence can't be bought, rented, or faked for long. If you're still watching this, still sitting with the discomfort instead of scrolling away, comment something that surprised you about your own behavior. Not what you think women do, what you noticed yourself doing. Awareness is the turning point. Everything before it is just repetition. There's a kind of grief that comes with realizing how many interactions were built on compensation instead of connection. How many times you tried to purchase certainty instead of tolerating uncertainty. Let yourself feel that without rushing to fix it. Grief is part of recalibration. It's how the nervous system learns a new pattern. And once that pattern shifts, money stops being your shield and starts being just one part of a full life. Chapter 5. You walk into the room without scanning it for her first. Not because you're trying to make a point, not because you've trained yourself into indifference, but because your attention is no longer on trial. Your posture feels different, not puffed up, not guarded, just settled. You take a breath before speaking. You let moments pass without filling them. And there's a strange realization that follows you around now, quiet but undeniable. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You're deciding whether you're interested. This is the shift men don't talk about because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There's no revenge glow-up montage, no sudden flood of women chasing you. In fact, for a while, it feels like less. Fewer texts, fewer invites, less noise. And that absence can feel like failure if your sense of worth was tied to response. But underneath that silence is something solid forming. You're no longer performing masculinity. You're inhabiting it. And that difference changes everything, even if it takes time to show itself. When money stops being your opening move, your conversations change. You're not trying to impress so you don't over-explain. You're not trying to secure interest so you don't rush intimacy. You say what you think without cushioning it. You disagree without softening your tone. You leave when you feel done instead of lingering for validation. And women feel that immediately, not as arrogance, not as coldness, but as self-trust, the kind that doesn't need applause. This is where respect actually begins, not because you demanded it, but because you stopped negotiating for it. Respect grows when someone senses that your boundaries are real, that your attention has weight, that your life doesn't rearrange itself for approval. It grows when generosity is offered freely instead of strategically. It grows when money is no longer an audition, but a background detail. And when respect grows, attraction finally has something stable to attach to. The men who never learn this keep telling themselves the same story with different faces. They keep upgrading the dates, the cars, the trips, the gifts, hoping the next woman will finally appreciate them. They don't realize they're repeating the same pattern because it feels safer than letting go of the identity that says, I'm valuable because I provide. Letting that go feels like standing naked in the open, but it's the only place where real connection can form. There's a moment that happens months later, sometimes years, where you look back at the old version of yourself with a kind of compassion, not embarrassment, not shame, understanding. You see how hard he was trying, how much he wanted to be seen, how much he believed effort could replace presence. And instead of judging him, you thank him for surviving long enough to learn the truth. That gratitude is important. It keeps you from swinging into bitterness. It keeps you human. Women who are capable of real connection respond differently to you now. Not louder, not flashier, deeper. They don't test you as much because they don't need to. They feel where you stand quickly. They bring effort without being asked. They're curious about your mind, not just your plans. And when they don't respond that way, you don't take it personally. You don't double down. You don't perform. You let it go cleanly without stories or resentment. This is the part men underestimate, how peaceful it feels to stop chasing reactions, how much energy comes back when you're not calculating value, how simple interactions become when you're not trying to win. That peace is attractive on its own, not because it's impressive, but because it signals safety rooted in self-respect. And self-respect is something people feel before they understand it. If this video has shifted something in you, if you're realizing how often you've confused being needed with being desired, share it with someone who's still stuck in that loop. Not to lecture them, just to plant the seed. Most men don't change because they're told to. They change because something finally clicks at the right moment. Money was never the villain. It was never the solution either. It's neutral. It amplifies who you already are. If you're grounded, it extends your life. If you're insecure, it broadcasts it. The mistake was thinking it could substitute for identity. Once you stop asking money to do that job, it becomes lighter to carry. You don't need to swear off generosity or pretend you don't care. You just need to stop using giving as proof of worth. Give because you want to, not because you're afraid of being overlooked. Lead with who you are, not what you can buy. Let attraction respond or walk away. Either outcome is clean when you're standing in yourself. If you've stayed through all 5 chapters, subscribe. Not because this was entertaining, but because this kind of honesty compounds. The more you see dynamics clearly, the less power they have over you. And that freedom, quiet and unflashy as it is the thing men were chasing with money all along.